Do you have any idea who I am? The question was not loud, but it landed on the white tablecloth between them with the force of a slammed door. Daniel Porter looked up from his menu, his brow furrowed in confusion. The woman across from him was stunning, dressed in a simple but clearly expensive navy blue dress, her dark hair pulled back in a severe but elegant knot. Her eyes, however, were chips of ice. "I'm sorry?" Daniel asked, his voice quiet. "I don't think so. Should I?" A flicker of something, disbelief, maybe anger, crossed her face. She glanced past him, toward a corner booth where a group of men in sharp suits were failing to hide their laughter behind their hands. Daniel's stomach tightened. He recognized them. They were the finance guys from the 38th floor, the ones who always walked past his cleaning cart as if it, and he, were invisible. One of them, a smug executive named Gregory Pike, raised his phone, pretending to check a message. The red light of a recording blinked from its camera, and in that single, gut-wrenching moment, Daniel understood. This wasn't a date. It was an execution. The woman's icy gaze returned to him. "I am Miranda Ellison," she said, each word precise and cold. "I am the CIO of Ellison Financial, the company where you, Mr. Porter, are employed as a janitor." It had started 8 hours earlier with a lie. Daniel was wiping down the glass doors of the main lobby, the scent of lemon polish hanging in the air, when Gregory Pike and his friends had approached him. This was unusual. They never spoke to him. "Porter," Gregory had said, a predatory smile on his face. "Big night for you, my man." Daniel had simply nodded, continuing his work. "A few of us were talking," another man chimed in, "and we think you're a good guy. Work hard. Keep to yourself. You deserve a break." Gregory leaned against the reception desk. "There's a woman in the accounting department. Sharp, pretty, but shy. She's seen you around and she's interested. We thought we'd play matchmaker, a little blind date." "Our treat." Daniel stopped wiping. He was 34 years old. His life was his 7-year-old daughter, Lila, and the quiet, predictable rhythm of his nightly shifts. Dating wasn't just on the back burner. It had been thrown out of the kitchen entirely. "I don't think so," he said politely. "But thank you." "Oh, come on," Gregory pressed, his smile widening. "Don't you get lonely. Le Meritage. 8 o'clock. Table for 2 is already booked. Don't make the lady wait." He'd said no 3 more times, but they were persistent, framing it as a kindness he would be rude to refuse. The seed of an idea, one he hadn't allowed himself to entertain in years, began to sprout. Maybe it wouldn't hurt. When he got home that evening to their tiny apartment, Lila was sitting at the kitchen table, meticulously coloring in a picture of a unicorn. She looked up, her bright eyes so much like her mother's that it still made his heart ache. "Daddy, you look nervous," she said with the uncanny perception of a 7-year-old. He managed a small smile. "Some people from work set me up on a meeting." With a new friend, Lila's face lit up. "A friend? Is she pretty?" "I don't know, sweetie. I haven't met her." "You should go," she insisted, jumping off her chair. She ran to his small closet and pulled out his one good shirt, a dark gray button-down he'd bought for his wife's funeral and hadn't worn since. "Wear this one. It makes your eyes look like the sky." Her innocence was the final push he needed. For her, he wanted to be more than just a tired janitor. He wanted to be a man who could still believe in good things. Across town, in a penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Miranda Ellison was having a similar conversation, but one steeped in suspicion. "A blind date, Gregory?" "I don't have time for that," she said, not looking up from the quarterly report on her tablet. Her 5-year-old daughter, Maya, sat on the floor nearby, arranging blocks into a perfect, silent tower. "He's a perfect match, Miranda," Gregory insisted over the phone. "Self-made entrepreneur. Built his company from the ground up, just like you. He's sharp, driven, and he specifically asked about you after seeing your feature in Forbes. Miranda sighed. It had been a year since her husband left. A year of crushing work and even more crushing silence from her daughter. The specialists all said the same thing. The trauma of the abandonment had stolen her voice. Miranda felt a familiar pang of desperation. Maybe a night out was what she needed. A moment of feeling like a woman, not just a CEO and a failing mother. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped. "One drink, that's it." Just as she was getting ready, her phone buzzed again. It was the babysitter, canceling with a last-minute emergency. Miranda stared at Maya, at her huge, expressive eyes that said everything her mouth would not. She couldn't leave her, but she also couldn't bear the thought of another night trapped in their silent apartment. She made a decision. She would take Maya with her. It was just one drink after all. What could possibly go wrong? Back at the restaurant, the world tilted on its axis. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The shy woman from accounting. The self-made entrepreneur. It was all a lie. A cruel, elaborate stage play designed for the amusement of a few wealthy men. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. He pushed his chair back, his only thought to escape. "I should go." No. Miranda's command was quiet, but absolute. Her eyes were fixed on Gregory's table, her fury a palpable force. "You will sit. You will order dinner. And you will not give those pathetic little boys the satisfaction." Just then, a small figure appeared at Miranda's side. It was her daughter, Maya, who had been sitting at a small table near the entrance with a hostess. With her was another little girl with bright, curious eyes. Lila. Daniel's sister had dropped her off, thinking the date would be ending soon. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Maya whispered, but no sound came out. She signed the words with her hands, a gesture so practiced it was heartbreaking. Lila, however, didn't seem to notice. She smiled broadly at Maya. "Hi, I'm Lila. Your mom is so pretty. My daddy is handsome, right?" Daniel's heart cracked. He looked at Miranda, a CEO he'd only ever seen from afar, and saw not a titan of industry, but a mother with a pain he understood all too well. He slowly pulled his chair back to the table and sat down. The joke wasn't over. It had just begun. The waiter approached their table, a walking picture of forced ignorance. "Good evening. May I start you off with something to drink?" he asked, his eyes carefully avoiding the smirking executives in the corner. Miranda didn't look at him. Her gaze was still locked on Gregory Pike's table, a silent promise of retribution. "I'll have a sparkling water. And bring 2 Shirley Temples for the young ladies." She turned to Daniel, her voice a low command. "What would you like, Mr. Porter?" The use of his last name was a deliberate wall, a reminder of their positions. He was an employee. She was his boss. This was not a date. "Just water is fine," Daniel murmured, placing his menu on the table. He had no intention of ordering food he couldn't afford. Not here, not under these circumstances. Lila, oblivious to the storm of adult emotions, swung her legs happily in her chair. "Can I have a cherry, Daddy? Can I have 2? "Of course, sweetie," he said, forcing a warmth into his voice that he didn't feel. The drinks arrived, and the silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Daniel could feel the stares from Gregory's table like a physical weight. They were waiting for the explosion, for Miranda to dismiss him with a cutting remark, for him to slink away in shame. But she did nothing of the sort. She sat with perfect posture, a queen on a battlefield, refusing to acknowledge the enemy's presence. It was Lila who finally broke the spell. She leaned across the table toward Maya, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "My favorite color is glitter. What's yours?" Maya looked at her, her large dark eyes full of an intelligence that seemed far older than her 5 years. She opened her mouth as if to speak, a tiny, hopeful gesture, but then her lips pressed together into a firm line. She looked down at her hands in her lap. A flicker of frustration crossed Maya's face. She picked up a fork, her knuckles white, and looked at her mother with a pleading expression. "She likes blue," Miranda said. her voice softer now, the icy edge replaced by a familiar, weary sadness. "And she wants to know if your dress has pockets." Lila giggled. "It does. For keeping secrets in." She turned back to Maya. "It's okay if you don't want to talk. Sometimes I get shy too, but Daniel saw it wasn't shyness. It was a lock, and somewhere, deep inside, Maya was the only one who had the key." He watched as a single tear welled in the little girl's eye and traced a silent path down her cheek. That was it. He couldn't stand it. The humiliation of the prank was one thing, but watching a child's silent suffering was another. His instincts, buried for 3 long years under a mountain of grief, began to stir. He ignored Miranda's startled look and leaned forward slightly. He wasn't a therapist anymore. He was just a dad, but he remembered. He took a sugar packet from the ceramic bowl in the center of the table and tore a small corner off. He carefully tapped a few white crystals onto the dark wood of the table, arranging them into a small, sparkling star. Then, he dipped his finger into his water glass and let a single, perfect droplet fall beside the star. "Look, Maya," he said softly, his voice gentle. "A wishing star and a magic moon." Maya's gaze lifted from her lap and fixed on the tiny scene. Lila gasped in delight. Daniel didn't look at Maya directly, knowing it would be too much pressure. He just focused on the table. He nudged the water droplet with his finger, making the moon slowly slide across the wood until it touched the sugar crystals. The star instantly dissolved, vanishing into the water. "The moon gave the star a hug," he whispered, "and now the wish is safe inside." He looked up then. Maya's eyes were wide, not with sadness, but with pure, unadulterated wonder. A tiny smile touched the corners of her lips. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, he saw the little girl behind the silence. Then she looked at the sugar bowl, then back at him, a clear, unspoken question in her eyes. Daniel pushed the bowl slightly toward her. Slowly, hesitantly, her small hand reached out, took a packet, and slid it across the table to him. It was a request, an invitation. Miranda watched the exchange, her hand frozen on her water glass. Her face was pale. She had spent a fortune on the world's leading child psychologists, behavioral therapists, and neurologists. They came with charts and diagnostic tools and theories. They had filled her daughter's life with sterile offices and analytical questions. Not one of them had ever made her smile. Not one of them had ever gotten a response. This janitor, this man her employees had chosen as a punchline, had broken through a wall in 60 seconds with nothing but a sugar packet and a drop of water. The rest of the dinner was a blur. They ordered food, Miranda insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument, and the girls ate their meals while Daniel and Maya continued their silent game, creating sparkling comets and dissolving galaxies on the tabletop. The laughter from Gregory's table had long since died, replaced by confused, angry whispers. Their perfect joke had somehow been ruined. As they stood to leave, Miranda met Daniel's eyes. The ice was gone, replaced by something he couldn't decipher, a raw, desperate intensity. In the grand, marbled foyer, as Lila was excitedly telling her aunt about the magic moon over the phone, Miranda cornered him. "The specialists have a name for it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Selective mutism brought on by trauma. They have no cure for it. They just have methods, none of which have worked." She took a step closer. "I have paid world-renowned doctors millions of dollars to do what you just did with a drop of water. So you're going to tell me who you are?" Right now, Daniel felt the walls closing in. The praise, the intensity in her eyes. It felt like a judgment, a painful reminder of the man he used to be, the man who had failed when it mattered most. "I'm the man who mops your lobby." "That's all," he said, his voice flat. Miranda's eyes narrowed. The CEO was back. "I don't believe you. You are going to help my daughter?" It wasn't a request. It was an order from on high. The words ignited a spark of defiance in him, fueled by years of pain. He looked at her, at this powerful woman who thought she could command the world, and he gave her the one thing she never expected to hear. "No," he said, the word quiet but firm. "I can't help her. I'm just a janitor, remember? That part of my life is over." He turned before she could respond, took Lila's hand, and walked out into the cold night air, leaving the billionaire CEO standing stunned and alone in the warm, golden light of the restaurant. Miranda Ellison did not get told no. The word simply didn't exist in her vocabulary. People didn't say it to her in the boardroom, in negotiations, or in her personal life. They capitulated, they agreed, they bent to the sheer force of her will. She sat in the back of her chauffeured car, the city lights a meaningless smear outside the tinted window, and the single, quiet word echoed in her mind. Number. It was infuriating. It was baffling. But worse than all of that, it was terrifying. For a few brief, miraculous moments in that restaurant, watching the janitor with her daughter, she had felt something she hadn't felt in a year. Hope. It was a fragile, unfamiliar sensation, and now he had snatched it away, leaving her with the familiar, cold weight of despair. He had opened a door for Maya, just a crack, and then slammed it shut in her face. She wouldn't accept it. She couldn't. This wasn't a business deal that had fallen through. This was her daughter's life. By the time she reached her silent penthouse, her anger had cooled into a sharp, focused resolve. Daniel Porter was a puzzle, and Miranda Ellison was very, very good at solving puzzles. In their small third-floor apartment, the scent of cinnamon toast filled the air as Daniel tucked Lila into bed. "Daddy," she whispered, her arms wrapped around his neck. "Can we see Maya again?" "She's nice." Daniel's chest tightened. "We'll see, sweetie." It was a complicated night. "But you made her smile," Lila said, her voice full of sleepy pride. "You used your magic." That was what his wife, Sarah, used to call it. His magic. The way he could sit with the most withdrawn, traumatized children and find a way into their world. He had built a celebrated career on it. He had been a healer. But when Sarah got sick, his magic had failed. He couldn't coax the cancer out of her body. He couldn't mend her failing cells with gentle words and patient games. He had sat by her bedside for months, watching the brightest light in his life fade away, and all his skills, all his empathy, had amounted to nothing. After she was gone, the thought of trying to heal anyone else felt like a profound hypocrisy. He couldn't fix what was truly broken. So he had quit, packed up his life, and found a job where no one would ever ask him for magic again. He kissed Lila's forehead. "It's not magic, baby." It was just a game. But as he walked into the living room and looked at the one framed photo he kept on the mantelpiece, a smiling Sarah holding a baby Lila, he felt the ghost of his old life all around him. The encounter with Miranda and Maya had ripped open a wound he thought had scarred over. His refusal in the foyer hadn't been an act of defiance against a CEO. It was an act of terror, a desperate attempt to keep the ghosts of his failure at bay. The next night, the atmosphere at Ellison Financial was charged. Word of the CEO's disastrous blind date had spread like wildfire. Daniel kept his head down, pushing his cart through the pristine, empty hallways, the squeak of his rubber wheels the only sound. He felt hundreds of eyes on him, even from behind closed office doors. As he passed Gregory Pike's office, the door opened. Gregory leaned against the frame, a mocking smirk on his face. "Well, well, well," he drawled. "Look what the cat dragged in. Heard you had a big night, Porter. Hobnobbing with the elite. How does it feel to be back in the gutter where you belong?" Daniel just kept pushing his cart, his jaw tight. "Excuse me, Mr. Pike. I have to clean this floor." Gregory's smirk faltered. He had expected Daniel to be ashamed, broken. He didn't understand why Miranda hadn't fired him on the spot. The joke hadn't played out right, and it was making him nervous. An hour later, Daniel was on the 48th floor. the executive wing. It was always silent up here, like a museum. He was wiping down the vast mahogany conference table when the door clicked shut behind him. He turned. Miranda Ellison stood there, her arms crossed. She had changed out of her severe business suit and into simple black trousers and a soft gray sweater. Without the armor of her office, she looked younger and infinitely more tired. "I pulled your personnel file," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier anger. It was flat, analytical. "It's a ghost. Custodial work for the last 3 years. Before that, a warehouse in Ohio. Before that, nothing. It's a carefully constructed history of a man who wants to be invisible." Daniel went back to polishing the table. "It's my history." "I don't care about your history," she said, walking slowly toward him. "I care about my daughter. She hasn't smiled in a year, Mr. Porter, a year. And tonight, when I put her to bed, she got a sugar packet from the kitchen and a glass of water, and she played your game. She played it for an hour, by herself. She was happy he stopped working but didn't look at her. He couldn't. "I will pay you," she said, getting to the point. "Name a price. Whatever it is, I'll pay it. A consultant's fee. I'll sign a contract right now. You can work with her an hour a day. You'll make more in a week than you make here in a year." This was her world. A world where everything, even hope, had a price tag. Daniel finally turned to face her. The look in his eyes made her take an involuntary step back. It was a profound, bottomless grief. "You think this is about money?" he asked, his voice cracking with a pain he had suppressed for years. "You think you can write a check and fix my past?" "The last time I poured my soul into trying to heal someone I loved, I held her hand while she died." He picked up his spray bottle, his knuckles white. "I am not a healer. I am a janitor. And your money can't buy a miracle." He pushed his cart past her and walked out of the conference room, leaving Miranda alone in the echoing silence, the smell of lemon polish in the air, her checkbook utterly useless. The fluorescent lights of the 38th floor hummed, casting a sterile glow on the polished floors. Daniel worked with a grim, rhythmic efficiency, his mind 1,000 miles away. His confrontation with Miranda Ellison had left him raw, exposed. He felt like a ghost, haunting the halls of a life that wasn't his. And she had seen him. His shift was nearly over. In 20 minutes, he would be on the bus, heading home to kiss his sleeping daughter's forehead. He was emptying the last trash can in the finance department's break room when he heard a crash from the kitchen area, followed by a string of curses. Gregory Pike stumbled out, his tie askew. "Porter," he snapped, his voice slurring slightly. "There's a situation in there." Daniel looked past him. A massive glass jar of gourmet coffee beans had shattered on the floor. Worse, a full industrial-sized bottle of sticky, dark brown caramel syrup, the kind used for fancy lattes, had been knocked over with it. The thick, viscous liquid was slowly spreading across the white tile in a 5-foot puddle, mingling with the shards of glass and thousands of coffee beans. It was a deliberate, malicious mess. "My apologies, Mr. Pike," Gregory slurred, not sounding apologetic at all. "Clumsy of me. You'll handle that, won't you? See you in the morning." He clapped a hand on Daniel's shoulder and staggered off toward the elevators. Daniel stared at the disaster. It was a 2-hour job at least. He wouldn't be home until after midnight. He wouldn't be able to check on Lila. A hot, bitter anger rose in his chest, an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. This wasn't a random accident. It was a message. Gregory was marking his territory, reminding Daniel of his place. He was just the man who cleaned up the messes. Miranda spent the next 2 days executing a strategy. If Daniel Porter wouldn't respond to power or money, she would have to find a different point of leverage. She tasked her discreet personal assistant with a simple research project. Find out everything the janitor Daniel Porter did when he wasn't at work. The request felt like a violation, but she justified it with a single, repeating thought. "It's for Maya." The report that came back was short and painfully simple. He worked. He took his daughter to school. On Saturdays, from 10 until noon, they went to the public library. And on Sundays, if the weather was nice, they spent the afternoon at Northwood Park. There was a carousel there that his daughter loved. On Sunday, the sun was bright and the air was crisp. Miranda dressed herself and Maya in jeans and simple sweaters, clothes they hadn't worn in years. She felt like an imposter as her driver pulled up to the curb of the public park, a place filled with the sounds of normal, everyday joy. She found them easily. Daniel was sitting on a bench, a worn paperback in his hands, watching Lila as she spun on the merry-go-round, her laughter peeling through the air. He looked different in the sunlight, softer. The harsh lines of exhaustion on his face were smoothed away, replaced by a quiet, paternal focus. He looked like a man at peace. Miranda took a deep breath and led Maya toward the playground. She didn't approach him directly. Instead, she sat on a bench on the opposite side of the carousel, her heart pounding like a corporate raider on the verge of a hostile takeover. Maya stood beside her, clutching her mother's hand, watching the other children with a familiar, heartbreaking longing. Lila spotted them first. When the carousel slowed to a stop, she jumped off and ran over, her pigtails flying. "Maya," she said, her voice full of genuine delight. "You came to the park." Maya gave a small, hesitant wave. "Do you want to go on the swings?" Lila asked, grabbing Maya's free hand. "Daddy pushes me so high I can almost touch a cloud." Maya looked up at her mother, her eyes wide with a silent plea. Miranda nodded, her throat tight. "Go on, sweetie. Go play." She watched as Lila led her daughter toward the swing set. Daniel had looked up now, his book forgotten. He saw her, and the peaceful expression vanished, replaced by a guarded tension. He stood up and began to walk over, his movements stiff. He stopped a few feet from her bench. "What are you doing here, Miss Ellison?" "My daughter wanted to go to the park," Miranda replied, her voice even. It wasn't a complete lie. "This is a big city," he said, his tone cool. "Lots of parks. But this one has a carousel." She looked him in the eye, abandoning the pretense. "I'm not here to offer you money, Daniel. I'm not here to give you orders." She gestured toward the swings, where Lila was chattering away while Maya sat motionless, watching. "I'm here because my daughter is trapped inside herself. And you, for some reason I don't understand, have a key. I saw it. She saw it. She hasn't stopped looking for sugar packets since that night." Daniel's gaze softened as he looked at the two girls. He saw Lila gently push Maya's swing, trying to get her to join in. He saw the flicker of a smile on Maya's face, a smile that didn't quite reach her lips but was there, in her eyes. And he saw her profound loneliness. It was a silence that felt achingly familiar. "I told you," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "I can't." Miranda stood up, her composure finally cracking. The desperation she felt every single day broke through her carefully constructed walls. "Why? Because you're afraid? So am I. I'm terrified. I'm terrified that I'll never hear her voice again, that she'll grow up in a world where she can't say I love you or I'm scared or even just her own name." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, raw with a mother's pain. "I don't know what happened to you. I don't know what broke you, but my little girl doesn't deserve to pay the price for it." She looked over at Maya again, then back at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Please," she whispered, the word stripped of all authority, all power. It was just a plea. "Don't do it for me. Do it for her." Daniel followed her gaze. He saw his own daughter, so full of light and laughter, and he saw Maya, a mirror image in so many ways, but trapped in the shadows. His firm refusal, his carefully built walls of grief, began to crumble into dust. The silence stretched between them, thick with the afternoon sun and the distant sound of children's laughter. Daniel's gaze drifted from Maya's hopeful face to Lila's trusting one, and back again. For 3 years, he had built a fortress around his heart, its walls made of grief and cemented with the conviction that he was broken beyond repair. But a 5-year-old girl's silent plea was a force more powerful than any defense he had ever constructed. The walls came down. He finally let out a long, shuddering breath, the breath he felt like he'd been holding since the day his wife died. "Okay," he said, the word quiet, fragile. Miranda's posture sagged with relief, a puppet whose strings had just been cut. "Thank you. I'll pay you, of course. We can draw up a contract." "No," Daniel interrupted, his voice firm again, but for a different reason. He was no longer pushing her away. He was setting the terms of his surrender. No contract, no money, and nobody at the office can ever know. Nobody. Miranda stared at him, confused by his refusal of payment. "But your time." "This isn't a job," he stated, his eyes locking onto hers. "If I do this, it's not as a professional. I'm not who I used to be. And there's one more condition." He hesitated, the words tasting like ash. "If I feel like I can't help her, if I'm not making a difference, I stop. Immediately. No questions asked." It was his escape clause, the emergency exit he needed to even consider stepping back into that world. Miranda saw the raw fear in his eyes and finally, truly, understood the depth of his wounds. This wasn't arrogance or stubbornness. It was survival. "Agreed," she said, her voice soft with a sincerity he had not heard from her before. "All of your conditions. Thank you, Daniel." 2 nights later, Daniel stood awkwardly in the marble entryway of Miranda Ellison's penthouse. The place was vast, minimalist, and silent. It felt less like a home and more like a modern art museum. It was a world of clean lines and cold surfaces, and he felt entirely out of place in his simple work jeans and a faded hoodie. Miranda led him into a large, open-plan living room. Maya was sitting on a plush white rug, surrounded by a mountain of expensive-looking educational toys, none of which she was touching. She looked up when Daniel entered, her expression wary. "We can work in here," Miranda said, her voice a little too bright, a hostess trying to smooth over a tense dinner party. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything at all." "Just let me know," Daniel nodded, his heart starting to pound. The self-doubt was a physical roar in his ears. "What are you doing here? You can't do this anymore. You're going to fail her." He knelt down on the rug a few feet from Maya, careful not to enter her space too quickly. He didn't look at the toys. He didn't look at her. He just sat, letting the silence settle. From the corner of his eye, he could see Miranda hovering near the kitchen island, wringing her hands, her anxiety radiating across the room. He knew that as long as she was there, radiating that desperate need for a miracle, Maya would never feel safe enough to emerge. He finally looked at Miranda. "Could you give us the room, please?" he asked gently. Miranda blinked, taken aback. "Oh, of course. I just thought—" "It's better if she doesn't feel like she's being watched," he explained. "Her silence is a shield. She won't lower it if she feels like she's being tested." It was the first time he had spoken with the calm authority of his old self. Miranda, accustomed to being in charge of every situation, found herself nodding meekly. She retreated to her home office down the hall, leaving the door open just a crack. For 20 minutes, Daniel did nothing but breathe. He sat on the floor and simply existed in the same space as Maya. He didn't try to talk. He didn't try to play. He was letting her know that he demanded nothing from her. Slowly, he reached into the small canvas bag he'd brought and took out 2 things, a small, smooth river stone and a thick blue crayon. He began to idly draw on the stone, his focus entirely on his task. He drew a simple, smiling face. Then he placed the stone on the white rug between them. Maya's eyes flickered down to it. He took out another stone and handed her a red crayon. He said nothing. He just went back to drawing on another stone, this time a lopsided star. For a long time, she just watched. Then, with painstaking slowness, her little hand reached out and picked up the red crayon. She didn't draw on the stone. Instead, she began to draw on the back of his hand. It was a single, wavering red line. A connection. Daniel didn't flinch. He let her finish, his own hand perfectly still. It was the smallest of breakthroughs, a silent conversation in a language of color and trust. Meanwhile, in a sleek, downtown bar, Gregory Pike was planting a seed. He was having drinks with a senior board member, a man named Wallace. "I'm just worried about her, you know," Gregory said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "She seems distracted, on edge. Did you hear about that blind date fiasco? I mean, with the company Janitor. It just shows a shocking lack of judgment. I hope everything's all right at home." He let the words hang in the air, a poisonous insinuation dressed up as concern. Wallace, a man who valued stability above all else, looked thoughtful. The seed was planted. When the hour was up, Daniel stood to leave Miranda's penthouse. He felt as though he'd run a marathon. "How did it go?" Miranda asked, rushing out of her office the moment she heard him move. "It went fine," he said, not offering details. "We're just getting to know each other." After he left, Miranda walked back to the white rug. She saw the stones he had drawn on, and beside them, she saw a piece of paper that hadn't been there before. Maya must have gotten it from a nearby desk. On it, drawn in a shaky 5-year-old's hand, was a picture. It was a simple stick figure of a man with a smiling face, holding hands with a little girl. Underneath them, Maya had drawn one wavering red line. Miranda picked up the paper, her fingers trembling. It wasn't a word, but it was a start. It was hope, and she held it like it was the most valuable thing she had ever owned. The sessions became a quiet ritual in their chaotic lives. Twice a week, Daniel would arrive at the penthouse after his shift, the scent of industrial cleaner still faintly clinging to his clothes. He would sit on the white rug with Maya, and for an hour, the world outside would cease to exist. There were no more magic breakthroughs, but there was progress, slow and steady, like a seedling pushing through frozen ground. Maya started using the stones to tell stories. A stone with a sad face placed far away from a group of happy-faced stones. A red line drawn to connect a small stone to a larger one. It was a language Daniel was beginning to understand. He learned that she was lonely at school, that she missed the dog she'd had before her father left, that she was afraid of the dark. While Daniel was with Maya, Miranda would wait in the kitchen, pretending to work on her laptop. But mostly, she listened. She didn't listen for a word. Not anymore. She listened to the quality of the silence. Before Daniel, the silence in her home had been a heavy, suffocating blanket of absence. Now, the silence in the living room was different. It was active, communicative. It was filled with trust. Their own conversation started tentatively in the moments before and after the sessions. "She seems to like drawing houses," Daniel commented one evening as he was packing his bag. "Always with one window and one person looking out." Miranda leaned against the door frame, a mug of tea warming her hands. That was her father's studio. He was an artist. She used to sit and watch him paint for hours. It was the first time she had mentioned her ex-husband without a bitter edge to her voice. Another night, Daniel was a few minutes late. "Sorry," he'd said, looking exhausted. "It's the anniversary of my wife's passing." Lila was having a tough day. "Tell me about her," Miranda asked softly, surprising herself with the directness of the question. Daniel looked down at the smooth river stone in his hand. "Sarah?" She was light. She believed everyone had a song inside them, and you just had to be quiet enough to hear it. He gave a sad smile. She would have known what to do for Maya. She wouldn't have needed any tricks. In these quiet confessions, the cavernous distance between the CEO and the janitor began to shrink. He saw the vulnerable woman behind the corporate armor, and she saw the brilliant, wounded man behind the custodial uniform. They were just two single parents, trying to navigate an ocean of grief and build a safe harbor for their children. It was a fragile, unspoken friendship, a bond forged in the silence of a little girl's room. Gregory Pike was not a man who enjoyed feeling powerless. He saw the subtle shift in the CEO's demeanor, a new lightness in her step that hadn't been there before. He saw the way she would sometimes dismiss her driver and leave the building on foot, heading in the direction of the janitor's shabby neighborhood. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew it involved Porter, and it was a threat. It was time to remove the piece from the board permanently. His plan was simple and cruel. He waited for a night when he knew a senior partner, Mr. Abernathy, was working late. Abernathy was notoriously fussy about his belongings, especially the antique gold fountain pen he kept on his desk, a family heirloom worth thousands. While Daniel was cleaning on another floor, Gregory slipped into Abernathy's office and pocketed the pen. However, not wanting to get his own hands dirty, he enlisted his subordinate, Peterson, to handle the final, crucial step. He gave the pen to Peterson with clear instructions. Use the duplicated master key to open the janitor's locker and tuck the pen deep into the pocket of his worn jacket. He then made an anonymous call to building security, reporting that he'd seen the night janitor acting suspiciously near Abernathy's office. An hour later, as Daniel was clocking out, two uniformed security guards stepped in front of him. The lead guard, a burly man named Henderson, who usually gave him a friendly nod, had a grim expression on his face. "Mr. Porter," Henderson said, his voice officially cold, "we need you to come with us." "What's this about?" Daniel asked, his heart beginning to thump against his ribs. "We've had a report of a theft on the executive floor. A valuable item has gone missing from Mr. Abernathy's office. We're required to search the staff who were on duty." Daniel felt a chill creep up his spine. This was wrong. This was a setup. "A theft?" "I didn't see anything. Just company policy, Daniel," the second guard said, a little more sympathetically. "Let's just get this over with. Can we check your bag and your locker?" They led him back to the custodial closet. Daniel opened his locker, his hands steady despite the frantic beating of his heart. The guard rummaged through it, pulling out his spare shirt, a worn copy of a novel, and finally, his jacket. The guard felt the pockets. His fingers closed around something hard and metallic. He pulled out the antique gold fountain pen. It gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light, a damning piece of evidence. Henderson held it up. "Can you explain this, Mr. Porter?" Daniel stared at the pen, his mind reeling. He had never seen it before in his life. He looked from the pen to the guards' stony faces, and he saw the trap snap shut. It was Gregory's face he saw in his mind, his mocking, triumphant smirk. "That's not mine," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I don't know how that got there." Henderson's face hardened. "That's what they all say," he sighed, pulling out a pair of plastic zip ties. "You need to come with us. Mr. Abernathy is on his way down, and he's going to want to press charges." Daniel sat in a small, windowless room in the basement security office, the stolen pen lying on the metal table in front of him like a verdict. The air was stale with the smell of old coffee. Henderson, the head of security, was questioning him, but his words were a distant buzz. All Daniel could think about was Lila, sleeping alone in their apartment, expecting her father to be home. What would happen to her if he was arrested? The door swung open, and a portly, red-faced man in an expensive suit stormed in. "Mr. Abernathy." He pointed a trembling finger at Daniel. "That's him! That's the thief!" he bellowed. "I want him arrested! I want to press full charges. The audacity, stealing a priceless family heirloom!" Henderson tried to placate him. "Sir, we're just following procedure." "Procedure?" Abernathy scoffed. "The man was caught red-handed. What more procedure do you need? Call the police, now!" Daniel felt the last of his hope drain away. It was his word against theirs, a janitor against a senior partner. He was already tried and convicted. "That won't be necessary, Philip." The voice came from the doorway, sharp and cold as steel. Miranda Ellison stood there, still in her work clothes, her arms crossed. She radiated an aura of absolute authority that silenced the room instantly. Abernathy's jaw snapped shut. Henderson straightened up as if the president had just walked in. "Miranda," Abernathy stammered, "this is a security matter. This man is my employee." She cut him off, her eyes fixed on Daniel. "And therefore this is my matter. You may go, Philip. Henderson and I will handle this." Her tone made it clear that this was not a suggestion. Abernathy sputtered for a moment, then deflated, nodding before scurrying out of the room. Miranda's gaze softened slightly as she looked at Daniel. "Are you all right?" He could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. She turned to Henderson. "Walk me through it." Everything Henderson recounted: the anonymous tip, the search, the discovery of the pen. When he finished, Miranda was silent for a long moment. "It makes no sense," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. She looked at Daniel. "I offered this man a sum of money that would change his life, and he refused it. Tell me, Henderson, why would a man who turns down a fortune steal a pen?" The security chief had no answer. "Pull the tapes," Miranda commanded. "I want to see all security footage from the 40th floor and the custodial area for the last 3 hours. Now for the next hour." The three of them sat in the main monitoring station, a dark room filled with the glow of a dozen screens. They watched hours of footage, sped up to a blur of ghostly figures. They saw Daniel doing his rounds, methodical and thorough. They saw Abernathy leaving his office. They saw nothing out of the ordinary. "There's nothing here, Miss Ellison," Henderson said, starting to look impatient. "Keep looking," she said, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "Look for who shouldn't be there." And then she saw it. A flicker of movement near the custodial closet, at a time when Daniel was on a completely different floor. "Stop, rewind that, zoom in on that hallway." The footage replayed in slow motion. A figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't Gregory. It was his closest associate, a junior analyst named Peterson. He glanced nervously up and down the empty hall before slipping into the unlocked custodial closet. He was inside for less than 10 seconds. "What time was that?" Miranda asked. 22:47, Henderson answered, checking the time code. "Now, show me the log for the anonymous tip." Henderson typed on his keyboard. A line of text appeared. "Anonymous call regarding suspicious activity on the 40th floor. Call received at 22:51, 4 minutes after Peterson left the closet." "I've seen enough," Miranda said, her voice dangerously quiet. She stood up. "Henderson, you are to release Mr. Porter immediately with a full apology. This investigation is now concluded." She walked Daniel to the elevator, the silence between them charged with unspoken emotion. As the doors slid shut, enclosing them in the small, private space, Daniel finally found his voice. "Thank you," he whispered, the words inadequate. "They were going to call the police. I didn't know what to do." "You didn't have to do anything," she said, turning to face him. "I knew you didn't do it." "How?" he asked. "The evidence." "Because I know who you are, Daniel," she said softly. "You're the man who plays games with sugar packets to make a little girl smile. You're the man who talks about his late wife like she's still the sun in his sky. You are not a man who steals." The raw, unconditional faith in her voice hit him harder than the accusation ever could. In that moment, she wasn't his boss. She was the one person in the world who saw him, truly saw him for who he was behind the uniform and the grief. The elevator chimed, arriving at the lobby. The doors slid open. Daniel didn't move. He just looked at her, his heart overwhelmed with a feeling he couldn't name. Gratitude, relief, and something more, something warm and terrifyingly new. "Miranda," he started, his voice thick. "Go home, Daniel," she said, her own eyes shining. "Go home to your daughter." He nodded, stepping out of the elevator. He turned back one last time, and their eyes met and held. A silent, powerful current passing between them. The threat was over, but something far more significant had just begun. The failed frame-up changed everything. Gregory Pike was left twisting in the wind, his associate Peterson fired for gross misconduct. Miranda didn't fire Gregory, which was in some ways a crueler punishment. She let him remain in his office, stripped of his projects and responsibilities, a ghost in a glass cage for all to see. He was a pariah, and his simmering rage grew more toxic with each passing day. For Daniel and Miranda, the incident had burned away all pretense. The crisis had forged a bond of trust so strong it was almost tangible. Their friendship, which had grown in the quiet space of Maya's therapy sessions, now blossomed in the open. Miranda insisted Daniel and Lila join her and Maya for dinner one Saturday night. Not at a fancy restaurant, but in her vast, sterile apartment, which she was trying, clumsily, to make feel like a home. They ate pizza on the floor of the living room, a shocking breach of penthouse etiquette. Lila and Maya built a fort out of sofa cushions and expensive throw blankets. For the first time, Daniel saw Miranda truly laugh, a genuine, unburdened sound that seemed to surprise even her. It happened when Lila put a piece of black olive on her nose and declared herself a unicorn. Later, after the girls had fallen asleep in the cushioned fort, Daniel and Miranda sat on the balcony, the city glittering below them like a fallen constellation. "I never do this," she said, gesturing vaguely at the domestic chaos inside. "Sit, relax. My life is a series of scheduled events. Mine too," Daniel admitted. "Work, sleep, make sure Lila eats her vegetables. It's a tight loop." "Is it enough?" she asked, her question soft and sincere. He thought for a long moment, watching the distant river of headlights. "It is when she's happy," he said. "That's all that matters." He looked at her. "You understand that." "More than anything," she whispered. It was in these moments that the space between them shimmered with a new possibility. He was no longer the janitor, and she was no longer the CEO. They were just a man and a woman who had found an unlikely anchor in each other in the middle of a storm. The storm, however, was not over. It was just gathering strength for its final assault. The email went out on a Tuesday morning. A mandatory company-wide town hall meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. The official topic was the announcement of the third quarter results and a new strategic initiative. The unofficial topic, whispered in break rooms and over instant messenger, was the sanity of their CEO. Gregory Pike's insinuations had done their work. Rumors were swirling about Miranda's erratic behavior and her inappropriate relationship with a janitor. The town hall felt like a tipping point. Daniel was assigned to work the event, a faceless uniform among a dozen others, checking badges and directing people into the massive, state-of-the-art auditorium. He saw the looks he got, the pitying glances, the contemptuous sneers. He had become a character in the corporate gossip mill. He found a position at the very back of the auditorium, leaning against the wall as the massive room filled up. He saw the board members take their seats in the front row, their faces grim. And then he saw Miranda walk onto the stage. She looked powerful and composed in a dark charcoal suit, but Daniel could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second across the sea of heads, a silent acknowledgement. "I'm here." The meeting began. A CFO droned on about revenue streams and profit margins. A vice president of marketing showed slick videos about the new initiative. The air was thick with a tense, expectant boredom. Everyone was waiting. Finally, the floor was open for questions. A few predictable softballs were asked and answered. Then, Daniel saw him. Gregory Pike, striding confidently to the microphone in the center aisle. He looked directly at Miranda, his expression a mask of false sincerity. "Miranda, thank you for your leadership," he began, his voice smooth and amplified throughout the auditorium. "My question is one of concern, a concern I think is shared by many of us who have dedicated our lives to this company." He paused, letting the drama build. "We have seen inconsistencies lately, a lack of focus, We've heard rumors of certain distractions, relationships that show a disturbing lack of judgment." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. This was an open rebellion. Gregory's eyes flickered to the back of the room, finding Daniel in the shadows. His lips curled into a barely concealed sneer. He turned his attention back to Miranda, his voice dripping with condescension. "So my question is this: how can we, the employees and shareholders, have confidence in our company's future when our CEO is demonstrating such poor judgment and mingling with the service staff?" The words hit like a physical blow. The murmuring stopped. A dead, shocking silence fell over the auditorium. Every single eye, hundreds of them, swung from Gregory to Miranda, who stood alone at the podium in the harsh glare of the stage lights. The board members stared straight ahead, refusing to look at her. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face, his fists clenched at his sides, helpless. Miranda stood motionless for a long, deafening moment, her face a pale, unreadable mask. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. She looked at Gregory, then her gaze swept over the silent, watching crowd, and finally, it landed on Daniel at the back of the room. She took a slow, deliberate breath, her fingers gripping the sides of the podium. A slow smile touched Miranda's lips. It was a strange, sad, and incredibly powerful expression. It was not the smile of a cornered executive. It was the smile of a woman who had just been handed the perfect weapon. She leaned into the microphone. "Thank you, Gregory," she said, her voice perfectly calm, yet it carried to every corner of the silent auditorium. "Thank you for your concern. Judgment is, after all, what I'm paid for. So let me tell you all a story about judgment." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the audience, the board members, and finally, Gregory Pike, who was starting to look uneasy. "For the last year," she began, her voice losing its corporate edge and becoming something much more personal, much more human. "Many of you have noticed that I've been distracted. You were right, I have been. Because for 365 days, my 5-year-old daughter Maya has not spoken a single word. Not one gasp rippled through the room. The story was so intensely personal, so out of place in this sterile corporate environment, that it was utterly riveting. Her father left," Miranda continued, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor Daniel could see in her hand. "And in the wreckage of our family, my daughter's voice was a casualty. I judged the situation. I threw money at it. I hired the best specialists in the world. They came with their PhDs and their theories. They judged my daughter to be a clinical case of selective mutism. They poked and they prodded and they tested, and all they did was make the silence deeper." She looked directly at Gregory. "Then, a few weeks ago, some of my employees, in a spectacular error of judgment, decided it would be funny to set me up on a blind date with the company janitor." The second gasp was louder, sharper. Gregory Pike's face went white. "It was a cruel, humiliating joke," Miranda said, her voice ringing with cold truth, "and the man who was its target had every right to walk away. But he didn't. He stayed. And he watched my daughter, who was with me, and he saw not a clinical case, but a lonely little girl." She turned her gaze to the back of the room, finding Daniel in the shadows. He didn't have a PhD. He didn't have a theory. He had a sugar packet. And with that sugar packet, he made my daughter smile for the first time in a year. The room was utterly still. No one coughed. No one moved. I learned that this janitor, this man so many of you have judged as invisible, was once one of the most respected pediatric speech therapists in the country, a man who healed children with his gift, but he judged himself more harshly than anyone. After he lost his wife to cancer, he believed his gift was gone, so he hid himself away where no one would ever ask him for help again. He judged himself to be broken. Tears were now openly streaming down the faces of men and women in the audience. Board members were staring at their hands, ashamed. Miranda's voice softened. but it was filled with a powerful, raw emotion. For weeks, this janitor has been meeting with my daughter in secret. For no money, for no recognition. He asked for nothing. He has been patiently, kindly, showing her a way out of the silence. He has been teaching me that you cannot judge a person's worth by the title on their business card. She took a deep, shaky breath, her eyes shining. She was no longer a CEO addressing her company. She was a mother sharing a miracle. "So to answer your question about my judgment, Gregory," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "This morning, because of that man's kindness, my daughter spoke her first word in a year. She looked at me, and she said, 'Mommy.'" A collective sob went through the auditorium. The silence was broken, replaced by a wave of overwhelming emotion. Then, one person began to clap, then another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet, the applause thundering, a roar of support, of empathy, of release. It wasn't for the CEO, it was for the mother. Gregory Pike stood frozen in the aisle, his face a mask of horror. His public execution had become his own. 2 security guards quietly appeared at his side and escorted him out of the auditorium without a word. Through the blur of his own tears, Daniel watched as Miranda stood at the podium, letting the applause wash over her. When it finally subsided, she made one last announcement. Effective immediately, Ellison Financial is creating a new charitable foundation, the Maya's Voice Foundation, dedicated to providing free therapeutic services for children who have experienced trauma. Her eyes found Daniel's again, a clear, unwavering promise in them. "And I have already found the perfect person to run it." Later, after the chaos had died down, she found him in the now empty lobby. The setting sun cast long shadows across the marble floor. "So," she said, a small, tired smile on her face, "Director of the foundation, the job is yours. If you want it." "Miranda," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything you said, You don't have to say anything," she interrupted softly. She stepped closer, closing the final inches of space between them. "You healed my daughter, Daniel. But I think maybe you healed yourself a little bit too." "You healed me," he whispered, realizing it was true. Her faith in him had been the one thing he couldn't give himself. She reached up and gently touched his face, her thumb brushing away a tear he hadn't realized was there. "The joke's on them, isn't it?" she murmured. "They tried to set up the janitor with the CEO. And what happened?" he asked, his heart pounding. Her smile was luminous. "The janitor saved the CEO, and her daughter." He leaned in, and she met him halfway. Their first kiss was soft, hesitant, a question and an answer all in one. It was not the end of a corporate drama. It was the beginning of a love story, built not on a cruel joke, but on a foundation of kindness, trust, and unwavering faith. 1 year later, the Maya's Voice Foundation didn't look like a corporate office, and it certainly didn't look like a sterile clinic. The reception area was painted in warm, sunny yellows and soft blues. A giant, comfortable-looking beanbag chair shaped like a friendly monster sat in one corner, and the walls were covered not with corporate art, but with the vibrant, messy, and joyful drawings of children. In a quiet room filled with sunlight, Daniel Porter sat on a small stool, his back to the door. Across from him, a little boy with wide, fearful eyes sat on the floor, his arms wrapped around his knees. The boy hadn't spoken since witnessing a traumatic car accident 2 months earlier. Daniel didn't speak either. He simply took a lump of soft blue clay and began to roll it in his hands. He molded it into a long snake-like shape, then flattened it. He rolled it into a ball, then poked a hole in it. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the soft squish of the clay. Finally, the little boy pointed at the clay. It was the first gesture he had made all session. Daniel looked at him and smiled, then broke off a piece of the clay and held it out. The boy hesitated for a moment. Then his small hand darted out and took it. It was a start. Daniel was no longer just a healer. He was a sower of seeds, patiently tending to the quiet, fragile gardens of children's minds. He had found his purpose again, not in the celebrated career he had lost, but in the quiet, anonymous work of mending what was broken, one child at a time. He left the foundation promptly at 5 o'clock. The old Daniel would have worked until he collapsed, but the new Daniel had a much more important meeting to get to. He drove not to his old, cramped apartment, but to a comfortable house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a house with a yard and a swing set. He walked into the sound of giggles. He followed the sound to the living room, where he found Miranda on the floor, her hair down, her sleeves rolled up, building an elaborate Lego castle with Lila and Maya. "The dragon is attacking," Maya shrieked with laughter, flying a red Lego creation through the air. "Princess Lila, you have to save us." "Never fear," Lila announced dramatically. "My magical knight will protect the castle." She grabbed a lopsided Lego figure and held it up. Miranda looked up at Daniel, her face glowing with a relaxed, easy happiness that he now saw every day. She was still the brilliant, powerful CEO from 9 to 5, but here, she was just mom. She had learned to build firewalls not just for her company's data, but for her family's time. She had discovered that the most valuable asset she had was not her stock portfolio, but a Saturday morning with no scheduled events. "Your magical night has arrived," Daniel said, leaning down to kiss her. "Daddy!" Lila and Maya shouted in unison, abandoning the castle to wrap their arms around his legs. He scooped them both up, one in each arm, marveling at the simple, perfect weight of his life. He had a home. He had a purpose. He had a family. The ghosts of his past were finally quiet. A few weeks later, on a warm autumn afternoon, they got married. There was no grand ballroom, no press, no guest list of 100 names. Their wedding took place in the backyard of their new home, under the sprawling branches of an old oak tree. The only guests were their daughters. Lila, the maid of honor, held a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself. Maya, the ring-bearer, clutched a small satin pillow with 2 simple bands resting on it. She had not stopped talking for the past year, her voice a constant, bubbling stream of joy that was the daily soundtrack of their lives. Daniel stood opposite Miranda, his hands holding hers. She wore a simple, elegant cream-colored dress, her hair adorned with a single white rose. "I once told you," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "that I wasn't a healer. I was wrong. You healed me, Miranda. You saw me when I was invisible, and you reminded me who I was meant to be." "I love you." Miranda's eyes shone with tears. "And I once thought that strength was about being untouchable, about never needing anyone," she said, her voice a soft whisper. "You taught me that true strength is about being vulnerable enough to let someone in. You and your daughter walked into my life on the cruelest of nights and turned it into the most beautiful gift. I love you, Daniel Porter." When they kissed, the girls cheered, throwing wildflower petals into the air. Later that evening, the 4 of them sat on a blanket in the yard, watching the first stars appear. Lila and Maya were nestled between them, sleepy and content. "You know," Miranda murmured, leaning her head on Daniel's shoulder, "it's funny. Gregory Pike tried to orchestrate the most humiliating night of our lives." Daniel smiled, looking up at the vast, peaceful sky. He thought of the cold restaurant, the mocking laughter, the crushing weight of shame. It all felt like a story that had happened to someone else in another lifetime. "And what happened?" he asked, the words a familiar, happy refrain. She laced her fingers through his, her hand warm and steady. "He introduced me to my husband. And that's a wrap on this story. But you know, the conversation doesn't have to end here. Let us know down below what part of the world this reached today, and maybe one word that says how it made you feel. It's incredible to think we're creating this sort of map of emotions together. What we're trying to do here is build a home for stories that actually matter. Stories about getting back up, about forgiveness, And that quiet kind of strength, if you want to help us build it, a subscription and a simple like goes a very long way. It tells the world that these stories are wanted, and it helps them travel to places we could never reach alone. I'm just so grateful you chose to spend your time here. Until we meet in another tale, try to be the kindness you want to see out there.